Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. In one of my older videos on the channel, I described Kingdoms of Amalur as the RPG with the smoothest combat system. This kind of fast-paced gameplay is something that you would expect to find in a really good pure action-oriented game, but definitely not in a huge open-world RPG. The studio behind Kingdoms of Amalur was well aware of this, and a big part of the promotional material for the game was about the actual gameplay or combat experience in particular. But more about that later. The future of Kingdoms of Amalur was not so bright ever since 38 Studios went bankrupt in 2012, the same year when the game released. Then out of nowhere, we finally got some good news in the late 2018 when THQ Nordic decided to buy this intellectual property. After that, it was only the matter of time when they're going to announce something new for Kingdoms of Amalur, which eventually happened with a remastered version being announced, along with a brand new expansion for the game called Fatesworn. Oh yeah, and a Nintendo Switch port. This is something that your favorite RPG YouTuber predicted in early 2019. One of the possibilities would be to release an enhanced edition of Kingdoms of Amalur and port it to current gen consoles, but what's maybe even more likely is the port for Nintendo Switch. Just think for a moment if this actually happens. Okay, I bragged enough about my psychic powers, now let's talk about the Switch port. Kingdoms of Amalur is one of those RPGs that I keep coming back to eventually, so if I want to measure the overall quality of the game in general, I think that's really important to keep in mind. The big selling factor is obviously the portability. You get this massive open world RPG with an insane replay value, and you can easily invest a couple of hundred hours into it on your portable device. And that's exactly how I spent the last 5 days with my Switch. I played it almost exclusively in the handheld modes. Now let's be clear about this, if you plan to buy this game only to play it exclusively in the docked mode, I don't think it's worth it, to be honest. The only benefit you get from the docked mode is the 1080p resolution, but the game still runs in 30 FPS. Well, for the most part at least. But the bottom line is, if you want to sit in front of your TV or a monitor, get this game on your PC or basically any other console than the Switch. Even if you have a really old PC, you can easily run this game without any issues. That being said, let's talk about the performance. Like I said, I played the game almost exclusively in handheld mode, so I'll be focusing on that. I don't have the tools for showing you the exact frame rate on the Switch, but what I do have is the sensitive eye for low frame rates. The game is aiming for 30 FPS, and for the most part that's what you're going to get. There are some serious frame drops in certain situations where the game runs in low 20 FPS and it's really noticeable. This part of the main quest was probably the worst example that I could find, where the game struggles with low FPS. But these situations are few and far between, so it's not a huge problem. The most important thing when it comes to this is how the game performs in fights. The gameplay is really fast-paced, so it's really easy to notice when the frame rate tanks. Luckily, that doesn't happen that often, even in the most intense fight scenes. This game really benefits from a high frame rate on the PC because of the fast-paced gameplay, but I still think it's worth getting on the Switch regardless. So besides the obvious frame rate limitations and the resolution, what has been sacrificed here? Well, as far as I could tell, nothing major. In fact, I was quite surprised with the draw distance in the game. It's actually really good and almost identical to the PC version, apart from the obvious lack of graphical fidelity on distant objects. If we compare it to the Skyrim port, for example, I think it's slightly better. Or at least less noticeable when some bigger object is fading in the scene in the distance. This is mostly because of the world in Kingdoms of Amalur is a lot denser, so it's not really eye-popping when it happens like in Skyrim. And it's definitely a lot more subtle, so bonus points for that. I was expecting to see a smaller number of NPCs on the screen in bigger places, but that doesn't seem to be the case, which is great. I was pleasantly surprised that nothing major has been sacrificed except obvious things in order to improve the performance. Speaking about sacrificing things, let's talk about the graphics. This remastered version of the game was supposed to improve the graphics in general, but if you watch my video for the PC version, you could see there is not a huge difference between the original and the remaster. So what about the Switch version? Well, I think the main thing which is holding this game together even today is the artistic style of the game, which aged pretty good actually. The textures are decent, especially when it comes to character models, or more specifically the armor pieces. Kingdoms of Amalur has a highly stylized look, and I would say it fits perfectly on the Switch. I think it wouldn't be so hard to believe that it's a Switch exclusive if you didn't know this game came out a while ago. The vibrant color palette is really pleasant to look at, although the colors are noticeably more washed out on the Switch version. But not to the point where the game looks bad. Overall, I think this game is really pretty to look at on the smaller screen. Unfortunately, I can't show you any footage in the docked mode because I still don't have a capture card. It does look better in 1080p, that's for sure, but compared to basically any other method of playing the game on a bigger screen, it will still look a lot worse. So I'll say it again, I don't think it's worth it if you're planning to play the game exclusively in the docked mode. But what about the exclusive Switch features? I started this video by talking about the great gameplay experience which this game offers. And you might be wondering if this version of the game is taking any advantage over Switch features like motion controls or the gyroscope. Well, no. This was kinda disappointing to learn, but it was not that surprising. I really don't see a proper way to implement motion controls in this fast-paced action RPG. And even if they could somehow do it, you would probably break your arms while trying to connect a couple of hits in combat. When it comes to the gyroscope aiming, there just wasn't any need to include it. Especially because the range gameplay in Kingdoms of Amalur is functioning with the lock-on mechanic, so you don't have any abilities where gyroscope aiming would be useful. But still, it's kinda disappointing they didn't even try to include these Switch features and try to breathe a little more life into these ports. Now let's talk about the game itself for a bit. Kingdoms of Amalur is a fantasy open-world action RPG with an interesting premise. Your character is somehow resurrected after he dies, and that allows you to change the fate of the world in a way you see fit. This makes you a target for Tuatha, a faction that wage war against all mortals. The fate narrative is also deeply intertwined with the gameplay itself. You get to choose different fate cards, which give you bonuses to your stats. This game has a classless progression system with 3 major skill trees where you can invest your points however you see fit. And by doing so, you can unlock different fate cards to get even more bonuses. Your choice of weapon types will shape your gameplay experience in a big way because each of them offers a unique moveset and combos that you can unlock. And no matter what you decide to go for, the combat will be fast-paced and really satisfying. Re-Reckoning tried to fix the main problem which the original game had, and that's the balancing issues and difficulty settings in general. They included a brand new difficulty option called Very Hard, but they also tweaked the balancing of the game in general. So, for example, this version of the game has increased spawn rate of enemies, and weapon durability mechanic is a lot more important now. Besides that, the way that level scaling works has been tweaked as well, which was a much needed change. Because the areas in this game would lock the level of enemies as soon as you first enter, which could make the game not challenging at all, even on the highest difficulty. The loot you get from containers is also tweaked, which basically means that now it should be easier to complete armor sets and the RNG shouldn't be so aggressive like before. And according to my experience with this remaster, this is actually true. I still haven't completed the playthrough on the Switch, but I did on the PC, and I can say I got a lot more armor set pieces than before. Another thing worth mentioning are 2 expansion packs for the game that you get on the Switch by default. And if you forgot already, there is a new expansion coming out this year called Fatesworn, so we're going to get some brand new content. This is nothing unusual for THQ Nordic because they also did something similar with Titan Quest. A Diablo-like RPG from 2006 got 2 new expansion packs and a Switch port as well. I didn't want to go super in depth about the game because this video was mostly about the port itself, but if you want to get some proper tips, especially for the hardest difficulty, you can check out this video I did when the PC version came out. And you can check out some of the major changes in the remastered version by watching this video. Anyway, I think this Switch port is worth getting for the portability itself, and I imagine that a lot of people who are actually going to buy it on the Switch already played it before. And if you didn't, I actually envy you, because you get to experience this great fantasy open world RPG for the first time. And that will be all for this video. Tell me in the comments, do you plan to pick this game up on the Switch, and have you played it before? Don't forget to subscribe for more RPG contents. If you want to support the channel in the long run, consider becoming a Patreon or a YouTube member. You can get your name on the end credits, as well as some other perks like early access to videos, Discord roles, my plans for future content, etc, etc. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.